Now live. Mic check. Oh, I need my ears. This will help. All right, boys. They say you need a hook to get people to watch your YouTube. How about 6 hooks? Check this out. You guys know what that is? Tonight's topic is how understanding science can make you a better fisherman. And at the end, I'm going to break down why I think this bait. This is the 11-inch glide bait by Buka Bull Shad. I think the 11-inch trick. So I'm going to save that for the end. And hopefully those hooks will get some more viewers. Always get a scratchy throat right when I start. All right. So how does understanding science, and I made some notes on my tablet, if I can get my tablet open. There we go. How does understanding science help us to become better bass fishermen? Hooking up. What's up? So the first thing I noticed when I went to school for fishery science was I was arrogant, a little arrogant in a way that I thought the fishing and the amount of time I spent on the water was going to help me with my schoolwork and make my life easier, in college, and majoring in fish since I was a fisherman. And actually, it kind of worked against me. Having that attitude definitely worked against me. I thought I was ahead of the curve, and not only was I way behind, but there's a little bit of an ego hit you got to take there. You got to swallow some pride to realize that pretty much everything you've seen and everything you've looked at from fishermen is not going to help you become a biologist. They don't break things down the way we break things down. So I've got a couple, maybe 4 things highlighted here that I wanted to talk about as far as how science made me a better fisherman. And I see Hooking Up coming in. I see Mike coming in on the chat here. Thanks for joining, guys. If you have anything that has helped you, that you've learned from the page or learned from another fishery scientist or another scientist that you've watched to help you make you a better fisherman, throw it in there. Let's touch on, what you guys have learned as well. So I think what I notice a lot of it is what I described, what I saw in myself, in that I thought I knew a lot more than what I actually did. You can't get a degree in fisheries watching television or going fishing. It's not going to help you at all. And like I said, it's probably going to hold you back. It's going to give you a false sense of security there. It certainly did for me. Like, one of the things that comes to mind, for years and years and years, I heard the wind blew the fish, onto the wind blow shoreline. The wind, the wind blows them over there. And that's about half right, making a statement like that, right? The wind does concentrate fish on the wind blown shoreline, but the wind doesn't physically blow the fish over there. And I've never heard anybody explain it that way. Everybody kind of comes on and it's like, duh, you already knew that. But I've never heard anybody articulate it very well in my entire life until I got to school. So what happens is the base of the food chain, plankton, phytoplankton to be specific, is like little green balls, little microscopic green things floating around in the water, doing their thing, using sunlight, photosynthesis, creating oxygen for the fish to breathe. And they are the base of the food chain. So like grass to a cow, kind of. Then you have another entire couple hundred species food web of zooplankton, animal plankton. Most is microscopic, some is not. Some are like Daphnia as an example of you can see those with a hand lens. Uh, a lot of that plankton, a lot of that zooplankton, 50% of it actually is bluegill's diet. That's what they eat. Their eyes are visually set up to see those tiny little things and get them out of the water, pick them off of plants and things like that. So it kind of reminds me too of I was tagged last night in a on a Facebook or no YouTube post about creature baits, and we had touched on creature baits, but we'll touch on it again. And I don't have a scientific study to point me towards any of this. It's just an opinion, and I like to make sure I denote my opinions, or note my opinions. Is that the right word? Right? I don't know. Make my opinion known. Um, when a bass is born, this is not my opinion. When a bass is born, for about the first 6 weeks of his life, it eats zooplankton. It can't feed on other fish. Has to get to a couple inch or two, get out there, and it will uh, then transition over to feeding on fish, and it'll stay on fish. But you got to think that if a bass is born, and for the first it's 6 weeks of its life or so, instinctively just feeds on all those little zooplankton squiggling around in the water, then there's in its brain, it's imprinted that it'll eat that. It understands from birth that it'll eat that. So when you start looking at creature baits and it goes Google some zooplankton and take a look at it, you'll see like a lot of those creature baits, of course, they're bigger, but aside from that, they look very much like zooplankton. So my opinion has always been, I think creature baits work well because it hits kind of on that instinctive zooplankton trigger that they had from being a tiny little fish fry. And of course, the YouTube experts called me a fool, but that's way too small for a bass. Well, yeah, but bass start out small. Again, do you understand the biology of the fish well enough to not make a comment like that? Apparently not. There's plenty of guys. That being said, the wind blows the plankton along the windblown shoreline. Filter feeders like threadfin shad or bluegill that feed heavily on 50% of their diet's plankton is going to move to the windblown shoreline because their food source is over there. And of course, bass are going to follow the bait fish. It's pretty easy, but I've never heard anyone, again, until I got to school and learned it, like articulated that way. I never thought about it that way. And I don't know. I think that's an important, I guess, ecology lesson to learn. All right. So what else we got on here? Oh, I've seen some stuff too about vision, bass's vision, and I think that's important to understand that they are visual predators. Their eyes are set up for dusk and dawn. They see better than bluegill at dusk and dawn because the bluegill's eyes are set up to feed on those tiny little things, right? So your eye has to be a certain, have certain characteristics, I guess, for lack of a better term, to be able to hunt and eat and tiny little things like that. But then it's got to give something else up, right? Because it's specialized in one way. It's specialized in that way, but that specialization to be able to feed on those tiny little things takes away from its ability to see in low light conditions. It's at a disadvantage in low light conditions where a bass is not. It's at an advantage in low light conditions. Its eyes are set up slightly differently as a big, top end predator. So understanding that their eyes visually are set for the twilight hours to give them the advantage, I think is an important, piece of fish physiology that all fishermen should understand. And that's bass aren't the only predators that have eye setups like that. Creature bait covered that. The eyes. Oh, well, so also understand too, lateral line system, right? And that's tied into the ear of the fish. Fish have ears. It's inside their head. There's a bone in there called an otolith. As the sound travels through the water, it moves that bone, much like our eardrum. And fish do have the ability to hear. And then tied into that, down the side of the fish, is another organ that none of us have, called the lateral line system. And I think the best way to describe lateral line is to think about a concert or one of those trucks at the beach with the loud stereo systems, where even if you were deaf, you could feel the music, you could feel the sound, right? When it's really loud, you can feel it. And that's the best way I can articulate how a bass can sense its surroundings. That lateral line system allows it to feel vibrations in the water, not as far away as like across the street from a truck. It has to be about a body length or so from the fish. It's got to be relatively close to the fish. But if you're relatively close to the fish, it doesn't need its eyes to know that there's something there. Again, set up for low light or no light conditions. It doesn't need it. And that's why you'll have good days in muddy water with like 2 inches of visibility. If you get your lure close enough to the fish, it'll feel it and it'll hit it. It'll eat it. It doesn't need its eyes. It literally, there's studies been proven. I think that the study I read was on pike, where the eyes that they were used blind pike, and the pike didn't need eyes to feed head first, no problem. It's a very sensitive system, probably a similar animal with echolocation like a bat, right? Very sensitive, because bats can't see very well. You see in their eyes, they're little pinhole things. They don't even hardly worry about having eyes, because the echolocation is so accurate. They can hunt. They hunt in a different manner. So a bass has both. It has really good eyesight, but if the water's really muddy or it's really dark, it can rely on its lateral line to track and hunt and eat, no problem. And I can remember as a kid, seeing the lake was muddy, thinking, oh, the bass can't see, so I'm probably not going to catch anything. Where now it doesn't bother me at all. Go Stain Lake. Okay, I'm going to do some color changes. I'm going to go to a higher vibration, something, maybe a bigger, maybe oversize the bait to give it a little more vibration, give a little more displacement to the water. And then also I'm going to tighten up my cast. Like if I'm working a point and I know there's a lot of rocks along the point, say, okay, well, I'm going to chop that point up about a foot apart. I'm going to make my cast very close to one another as I work my way down. And then that way, because I know the bass can't see, but if I'm fishing for a 24-inch fish and I'm making 1 foot casts, spacing my casts a foot apart, eventually I'm going to bring it through. If there's a fish set up, suspended on that point, I'll be able to get my lure close enough that its lateral line can see it. So I'm not making real wide casts when I'm in low light or when I'm in muddy water. Again, I think that's super important information for a fisherman to have, that I never heard anybody say. And I've watched every fishing show, read every fishing magazine, since the 80s. I was an avid bass fisherman my entire life. We had ponds around my house, and I was fortunate enough that folks let me fish from like 8, 9 years old all the way till I graduated high school. Got to fish a lot in ponds. I was very fortunate. And so I was as well read as any kid who was an avid fisherman, as well watched all the stuff, never heard any stuff like that. I think that's important. Speaking of, like ecology, we don't even have to understand fish ecology or fish physiology, right? One thing I've got noted here: 50-degree water in the springtime. That's a green flag for me. As soon as I see 50, even 48 in the rivers, like as soon as it approaches 50, after the winter break and you get into that, what you got is the crawfish spawn. And crawfish are weird the way they spawn. They don't spawn the way you think. They like keep the babies on their back, and it's just an insemination thing. There's not baby crawfish going everywhere at 50-degree water. But what does happen at 50 degrees is those crawfish start emerging from their wintertime burrows. And since they're out crawling around, getting ready to do their thing, a crawfish pattern at 50 degrees is a good idea to have in the back of your mind, right? Another thing to understand about crawfish is when they're down in their burrows, they'll be filtering the they'll be filtering zooplankton out of the water, but that a lot of that water is kind of passed through into the burrow and is mixed in with the soil. So, like in Georgia or many places, you'll see the crawfish emerging out as like a reddish in color, and it has to do with the filtration, kind of the soil being mixed in, like the red clays and things like that being kind of mixed in there, I think, if I remember correctly. But you'll see that red color on the biggest crawfish predominantly in the springtime. And then that's why you see everybody going to the red cranks, red craws, red whatever. That's the best time of year because of that. Now, your smaller crawfish, if you scale down, you don't really have to scale down and use red because the smaller ones, especially here in the South, won't burrow. They just kind of stay, I guess, hidden somewhere. The best place to learn all this stuff is the Tackle Talk that I was on. There's a crawfish expert. It's called the Bait Breakdown. I was the first guest. I believe the second guest was the crawfish expert. So if you want to know everything about crawfish, and if I misstated anything here, it's completely possible. Just go listen to the Crawfish Ninja that Andrew had on, and you'll get more information from that than anything I can talk about here. I'm just touching the highlights. Smaller crawfish usually don't burrow. Green pumpkin, tan, reddish. You don't have to go bright red. A little orange sometimes, like green pumpkin orange, I think is a nice, if you had green pump, just maybe like some orange tips on the feet, on the claws, just a touch of orange in it to give it some highlights. I think you're in good shape. Also, too, all the crawfish in the lake are never the same color. Like if you put a crawfish trap out and catch them, they're going to be a variety of colors. Think about it this way. What the crawfish eat affects their colors too. If you're in a predominantly muddy lake with low amounts of aquatic vegetation, they're going to lack some minerals. I think it was vitamin A. I can't even remember. Again, go listen to the Crawfish Dude. But because of the lack of plants means a lack of a certain kind of vitamin, which means your crawfish are going to be blue-black. Whereas if they're in a clear lake and they've got some plants that they can go and scrape and feed and eat the plant material that gives them the vitamins that they need, and you're going to be probably lean more towards green pumpkin. All right, just basic ecology, basic crawfish stuff. All I think is really important stuff, right? Frank, what's up? I got a scratchy throat. Adaptability. Let's see what have I got listed here? Environmental shifts, early water warming. We just talked about that. Fish blown to shore. All right. How long have I gone? Oh, good. Only 18 minutes. Sometimes I get run of my mouth and it's an hour later. So I covered kind of some highlights of some science there that I think is important that we've covered, plenty of times here, but I'm sure we got a lot of new folks. And I think I just wanted to highlight those ideas to give you an idea of how maybe opening up a science book, right, isn't going to hurt you at all. A lot of things, another one that comes to mind is like bluegill. I can't tell you how many times I've posted on the internet. Bluegill spawn multiple times per season. That's why we like using them in ponds. You get multiple pops from the spring to the fall. Maybe you'll miss a few in the heat of the summer. Sometimes the heat will shut them down from spawning. But like most of the time, depending on what state, 3 to 5 spawns on your bluegills, pretty normal. And if I had $1 for every time somebody told me that bluegill only spawn once a year, I'm like, really? Go read a book, dude. Like, you're only looking at the very edge, at the very smallest beds. Even the predominant bluegill beds are usually not in 2 feet of water. I've had ponds where the best bluegill beds are sitting out in 12 feet of water on a sandy substrate point, a 16-acre pond, clear water. So you got plenty of depth, you get plenty of oxygen down deep. They're going to spawn out there. You can see the beds on the graph, those little dimples that kind of looks like honeycombs in the bottom. Those are the bluegill beds. So pattern your bluegill, watch on your graphs. Now you can just see them sitting down there, if they're on the bed or not, with the live scope. That's easy enough. But when you've got an area where all the dominant and the biggest bluegill are going to spawn, it would make sense to fish around that area, wouldn't it? Pretty, like, if you're there, just maybe hit the sides of the edges of the bed, look for the structure, look for ambush points, blowdowns, and things that are near those bluegill beds. You're probably going to find some decent bass around there because of the frequency of the bait being in the area. Basic science. All right. So let's go back through the chat real quick and see if there's anything anybody threw in here. Thanks for joining, boys, once again. Oh, Hooking Up says, went out in the yak. Cool. Stung by a bunch of bees. Wow. Funny you mentioned that. And a lightning storm. Fun. So let me guess. You maybe yeeted one a little bit too far up into a bush or a blowdown with some limbs, and you didn't see the nest, and you went to get your lure out, and you paid the price? Probably. I went fishing with my friend Phil at the Hooch, and the same thing happened to me. Although I think I got stung by one bee and a bunch of ants that were in the tree. But with all my allergy issues, it cut my day short. It was very disappointing. Looking forward to fishing with Phil, and had to leave and go get some Benadryl, and just in case I, got anaphylactic shock. Nice. Better fishing with 2 ball biologists. That's right, man. I like that, Sterling. Very good. And Hooking Up says learning some science has definitely made him a better fisherman. Well, I'm glad to hear it. That's what we want to hear. Yeah, fishing in the wind. I like to chop. We can, just for our pond management, when I'm dealing with ponds, especially with ponds with avid fishermen, if the water is calm, glass, if you got slick water and clear water, the bass can see out as well as you can see in. Right? So if you just walk right up to the bank, they're going to move away. They're going to know. They're going to figure things out, especially your bigger fish that's been in the pond for a few years, right? Your smaller 1-pounders, assuming your 1-pounder is only a year old, which most 1-pounders are 8 years old due to catch and release and people not harvesting them enough. But if you got a decent pond with decent balance, you walk up to the edge, you're just announcing your presence with authority. You're just coming in there too hot. You need to kind of treat it more like a hunting situation and work your way up a little bit slower. I've just noticed that pattern on ponds. You need to be a little more stealthy on the glass calm days. Now, go back to the wind, put a little chop on the water, and now you can't really see in the water very well. And guess what? They can't really see you very well. So wear some natural color clothes so you don't clash, and don't go crazy running around on the choppy days. You're going to have a visual advantage from the bank or in a boat, but they can see the boat, they can see the boat, no matter what. And if you're banging on the boat, that sound travels through water. Going back to the hearing part we just talked about, that sound is letting everything in the lake know, in a pond especially, maybe not everything in a big lake, but everything in a pond knows there's something banging right over there. And if they learn to associate the banging around with negative, being caught, being handled, that banging around is going to tip them off. They're going to learn real quick. They're not dumb. Yeah, exactly. Good observation, Hooking Up. Just kind of reiterated what I said about the spawn. You see those spawning habitat. And again, don't get married to the idea that you can see all the bluegill beds in the pond. You can't. That's never works that way. They'll be in deeper water than you think. And also something to think about, basic biology, avian bird predators, flying death. Bass and bluegill that know what they're doing are not going to have their backs out of the water during the spawn, because they have to sit there for a really long time. If they've got bird predators, like we got bird predators here, osprey, eagles, everything else under the freaking sun. The smartest fish with the highest reproductive success is not spawning into a foot of water or 2 feet of water where they're easily captured, but can be picked off by a bird. They're going to be in a little bit deeper water where the birds aren't going to have as bad, as good a chance as getting them. Hey, what's up, Arkansas? Glad you're joining in again, man. Thanks for coming in. Oh, bees on the water. Wow, interesting. I missed my guess. Oh well. Glad I didn't bet. Ooh, 10 times. See, man, 10 bee stings, and I would be hard no. Hard no, boys. All right, I'm gonna scroll back up again just to make sure I miss a question or anything. You guys have anything for me? Got 8 in the chat right now. Like to see it coming back up. To finish up the thought, I just glanced over. I started the video. I said you need a hook on YouTube to get people hooked into the video. So I held this up. I got 6 hooks. Look at that thing. Look at that thing. You guys know what that is? That's the 11-inch trick shad by Boca, bull shad. And that goes back to a point that I wanted to make with understanding biology. That largemouth bass has a mouth, the ones we want to catch, right? Has a mouth like that. That means, let's just look at it this way. Any bass, that's too small of a mouth, right? But once I get out to here, all right, that's the only thing that limits the bass's ability to eat, right? So look how small that is. That's not even a very big bass, right? As long as it can fit head first and fit top to bottom in a bass's mouth, it can swallow it. So what's that? 11-inch bait can be chewed by what? 3.5, 4 pounder? No problem, right? So once you get out and get that big gate on those 7, 8, 9, plus pound, those big fish, they can chew that easy. And I can't tell you how many people go, oh, you got a big enough lure? What are you fishing for? Sharks, whales, blah, 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 whatever. Jack crap about how bass feed. And if you guys caught that with Mike, the post that I did with the rerun that I put up with Mike, we touched on that. It's so smart to have an oversized bait. Now, am I going to yeet that oversized thing all day long? No, I'm not. But am I going to keep it on a rod somewhere? And when I get done fishing with what I think I need to be fishing with, am I going to roll that thing over the top of that piece of structure before I leave? Yes, I am. And it hits on that instinct of it's injured, it's trap position, and it's worth it because it's big. It's just like an instinctual thing, kind of like we talked about. Bass will instinctively, go after a jerk bait, not because they're hungry, just because they're like cats, and it'll just instinctively trigger them to hit it. And that's also why you'll see a lot of your, jerk baits hooked on the outside of the fish's head, because it really wasn't going to eat it. It was really just triggered by it, and it ran up to it, and it caught it in the side of the head. Same thing applies here with the size. Instinctively, they will trigger like, oh man, I wasn't even thinking about eating, but look at that's too big and too easy a meal. So it'll come whack it, it'll come get on it. And another reason why I like treble hooks on big glide baits like that, because maybe they just go up there and slap it in the side of the head, and I catch them on the outside of the mouth instead of on the inside of the mouth. I don't care as long as I'm catching them. But again, the biology of the fish, understanding the instincts of the fish is critically important. So when anybody says to me, "Oh, you fishing with a big enough lure?" Yeah, I am, as a matter of fact. And you know jack squat about what bass eat or what triggers them to eat. Go laugh that up, joking boy. Arkansas's in. All right, boys, throw me up something in here. We're going to wind it up at 30 minutes because I'm running out of ideas. I've run through everything I've done in a half an hour. But maybe half an hour videos are where I need to be. Maybe I'm hunting over the wrong field going for an hour. What do you guys think? I downloaded the live from last night down to here, but I have not re-uploaded it. I'm going to do a little bit of editing. How about that for an idea? And then repost that maybe in a week or whenever these other videos that the old ones that I've been recycling that I think are important for people to watch. Because only we had a nice comment from somebody in the chat a couple days ago about how they can't believe with all the information that's here and the people that I've got here interviewed that it's only has 20 views or 40 views or 100 views or whatever. And I agree. But I also think that falls back onto, well, first thing, it's hard to make classwork like this entertaining. It's kind of boring. I get that. We're talking about ecology, we're talking about science, it's not like talking about fishing. But I think if I can blend it back into enough, I can get guys to pay attention and get guys to handle fish safely and understand pond ecology, pond biology, fisheries management. Sorry about that. I think all this stuff is really important. And I don't know. That's what drives me to keep going and keep doing this every single day. And hopefully we'll get some more people. Certainly glad for the 8 of you that are here right now. I hope it helps you in your fishing. And I really appreciate you guys coming out here and hanging out with me every day. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm going to cut it at 32 and do another short one for today. I hope the information helped, and I'll see you again. Tomorrow night. We'll do it again tomorrow. Appreciate it.